Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our first scrutiny meeting as Cheshire West and Chester being live. Thank you all for coming to Northwich. Ironically, this makes Northwich the most popular place we visited outside Chester, which says something. Thank you also to Connexions for inviting us here. It's very kind of you. We're not expecting to solve world problems tonight. What we are expecting to do is to learn and to understand. And those from you Connexions will probably know there was a degree of controversy, interest, call it what you will, at our budget meeting as a council, and Connexions funding was an issue which was raised. And that's one of the reasons why we're here, not only to understand your funding a little bit better, but also, as Councillor Merrick put it in the council chamber, that not enough councillors understand the work that Connexions actually does. So it's your opportunity to talk to us about that.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Steve Hoy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Connexions Company for Cheshire and Warrington. And I'm joined by three of my colleagues who will introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Norma Guest. I'm Director of Operations.
I'm Jimmy Through. I'm the Connections Manager for Cheshire West and Chester.
I'm Helen Bird. I'm the Information Marketing Manager.
Formally, we have two of our council officers, and you'd introduce yourselves, please, as well.
John Stevens, Director of Children and Young People's Services.
And Julie Gill, Director of Resources.
Good to meet you. Thank you for coming tonight.
We are where we are in 2009 with a company that currently has moved into the ownership, and I'll spend a little bit more time to talk about this, moved into the ownership of Cheshire West and Chester, Cheshire East and Warrington, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So what I'm going to present to you is something a little bit about your own company, and a company which I'm really proud and my colleagues are proud of in terms of the services that we deliver to young people in this area. And I think what you're getting is a real asset, and it's also something that you should be proud of. I hope you will be proud of it. I hope we can make you proud of it, because we do a lot of good work for young people. That's not complacency, that's a track record that we've demonstrated over a number of years. There endeth the Chief Executive's speech. So it's the provision of statutory guidance for young people, independent advice and guidance. That's a statutory requirement, and that's quite a challenge for us, particularly in the changing world of 14 to 19 diplomas, supporting young people with learning disabilities, supporting young people who may be first-time entrants into higher education, so providing aspirational raising activities in partnership with Aim Higher. So a huge range of activities that goes on there. What's really important here is that we are one of the first totally integrated youth support services. What you have is a company that is breaking barriers by bringing together youth workers and Connections PAs, working together side by side in teams, developing mutual respect in terms of their professions, but tackling problems at local levels. And we've just completed, probably 6 months ago, a structural reorganisation into Cheshire West and Chester, which Jimmy delivers operationally in Cheshire East. But we're also now moving towards area partnership board structures to map onto the activities that you're working with as well.
We're commissioned to deliver services to young people aged 13 to 19. So the cohort we're working with is just over 32,000 young people in that age bracket. But we do also offer, we have to offer services for young people up to the age of 25, for those with special needs or learning difficulties and disabilities, for example, as well. Because obviously we want to keep young people who are not in education and employment training as low as possible. We want to make sure that they're actually in education and employment training, being successful in that and achieving in that. So that's, one of our main aims as an organisation. We do have a comprehensive performance management system in terms of actually monitoring performance. So very much kind of target setting, a business model really around target setting and monitoring that very closely to make sure that we do improve outcomes for young people, and that's both qualitative and quantitative. So it's looking at, how are you doing against the target numerically, but also qualitative in terms of what's the quality of the practice that's happening and what is the quality of the outcomes for the young people and how far have those young people travelled, really.
Explain to me the proportion of funding from Cheshire East, Cheshire West and Warrington, bearing in mind the disparate populations that are there and also the corporate structure that you've described. I was conscious that one of your earlier slides referred to a third for Warrington, Cheshire West, Cheshire East, as it were, but obviously the populations are not equivalent Warrington, I just checked on my iPod as I was listening, has a population of around 197,000 people. Cheshire East has 360,000, and if I remember correctly, Cheshire West and Chester has about 328,000, give or take. So I'm intrigued to understand the proportions of the funding between the various authorities.
The proportion of the ownership is a temporary arrangement that was agreed by the County Council and Warrington Borough Council, so that there was no one local authority in overall control. Prior to the 1st of April, the split was 75-25%. The split now will be a third, as you say, quite correct, and it will move us forward so that the legal folks can agree the new ownership proportions. In terms of whether it's based upon population size as the determining factor in the future, that was an interesting debate a year ago, but the County Council put into it the youth service resource, so the amount of resource and the size of the contracts is significantly larger in Cheshire than it is in Warrington, so that was a factor in moving to 75%. Prior to going to 75%, it was 66% and 33%, so 2/3, 1/3. But the changes went to 3/4. So the interim period now allows us an equitable share and voting rights whilst we come up with a new ownership figure to recognise the new local authority structure in Cheshire.
Julie, would you like to talk to us about the finances? I would love to know about the £200,000 in particular.
The background to it from the council's perspective is that there was a £30 million saving to be found, which was just under, slightly less than 10% of the council's overall budget. Children's are a priority area, and I know it perhaps doesn't feel very good to actually have any cut at all, but we did try to minimise the impact. We didn't put a straight 10% across. We wanted to look at it and try to make sure that there was the opportunity to look at services in the intelligent way that John has just described.
Are you in a position to help us understand what the extent of any cut, whether it was a real terms cut or otherwise, from your perspective?
That was one of the questions that we put to the board and said, well, what will this mean? What will this mean in terms of impact on children and people? Now, you've seen, Steve used the phrase himself, this is a can-do organisation. And actually, the meeting that we had on Monday with our colleagues in the East and Connexions was very much to go through and say, so what will this mean? And actually, for us to say, well, we don't like that, that if it's going to mean that, can we find another way to do that? In fact, we didn't end up saying that, because what Connexions have done is exactly as Steve described. They've taken a can-do attitude. They said, right, this is the situation we're in. None of us are happy about it. None of us are saying, oh, great, we faced a £200,000 cut in our income. But actually, this is where we are. This is what we've got. This is what some of the balancing factors, these are the priorities, and this is how we're going to work to move forward. And we've been through that in some detail. And actually, I'm very happy with the way in which that's happened. I think actually, if there was a way of minimising the impact of that in terms of frontline need to those who need it most, that's what I think we've been able to achieve. And there really has been that minimising through quite creative working really, and moving resources around. That's not to say that it's an ideal position. It isn't. And it's not where any of us would particularly want to be, particularly with the very short notice with which this had to happen. All of which we acknowledge and say that's not the way we would want to work routinely or going forward.
Steve, do you agree with that? I think I have to ask you.
With the commissioner sat here. I think that the historical perspective I didn't put into it, which makes it more difficult, was that in joining together the youth service and Connexions, our budget was reduced by just under £1 million in April 2008, and we achieved that in the main by the reduction of management posts. 20 management posts went equitably from the youth service and Connexions. So to receive a £400,000 cut, if we take the two Cheshires, on top of the fact there was no inflation uplift for any kind of pay award, came as a shock, as John said, at a fairly late notice. But we argued, we stamped our feet, the board was very angry, very upset, but at the end of the day there was no more money, and the new authorities are where they are, and we had to make the best use of it. It's meant making redundancies and job losses, but we're in a position now where we're going forward.